Good morning and welcome to Renaissance FM with me, a.busiakiewicz, covering in for Stephanie Feeney, the usual presenter of this very fine show indeed. Now, joining me in the studio today, I have an extremely talented and young countertenor from King's College, Cambridge. Patrick Dunachie is in his final year at Cambridge, where he is currently studying music. Now, Pat's first musical training was learning the piano with his father, before going on to be a chorister at Hereford Cathedral in 2002. And since leaving Hereford after his schooling there, he has been very fortunate to gain a huge amount of choral experience, singing with groups such as Ex Cathedra, the Armonico Consort, the Gesualdo Six, and even deputising with choirs of Christ Church, Oxford, Merton College, Oxford, Gloucester Cathedral, and the Royal Military Chapel, amongst others. And the many, many highlights of his solo career have thus far included performances at the BBC Proms and, of course, at King's College itself, alongside opera work for various ensembles, including Birmingham Opera Company as well. And his academic studies at Cambridge have allowed him to explore his passion for early music, yet his talents as a versatile countertenor has seen him tackle a vast amount of repertoire, from Bach to Stockhausen. How courageous of you indeed. So welcome, Pat, to the show.
Thanks, Rob.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for coming on. And I thought it would be good before we start talking, perhaps to actually give our listeners out there an idea of the music and the idea of what your voice, the countertenor, sounds like. So Sure. Would you like to briefly introduce the two pieces that we'll be playing?
Yeah, our first two pieces, Adam, are going to be probably the most famous lute song, which is the genre we're going to be playing this morning. It's called Flow My Tears, and it's by John Dowland. The second piece is also by John Dowland, and that is I Saw My Lady Weep. They're both miserable numbers, but that was the standard practice of the time.
Yeah,
so
and we should explain that Flow My Tears was kind of like, it was the one, the most popular piece of music almost, or
Absolutely.
songs in 16th.
Top of the pops of its
Indeed.
day.
So here we go.
Flow my tears, fall from your springs, exile forever let me mourn, when night's blackbird her sad infamy sings, then let me live forlorn. Down vain lights shine you no more, nor nights are dark enough for those that in despair their lost fortunes deplore. Light doth but shame disclose. Never may my woes be relieved, since pity is fled, and tears and sighs and groans, my weary days, of all joys have deprived. From the highest smile of contentment, my fortune is thrown, and fear and grief and pain for my deserts, are my hopes, since hope is gone. Hark you must well learn to contemplate. Happy, happy they that in hell feel not the world's despite.
Absolutely wonderful. And now for our next number, I Saw My Lady Weep, once again by John Dowland.
I saw my lady weep, and sorrow brought to me advanced soul. In those fair eyes, in those fair eyes, where all perfections keep, her face was full of woe, but such a woe, believe me, as wins more hearts than mirth can do with her enticing parts. Oh, fairer than all else, the world can show enough in time to grieve. Enough, enough, your joyful looks, your joyful looks excel. 'Tis kill the heart, believe, believe. Oh, strive not to be excellent in war, which only breeds your beauties overthrow.
Absolutely fantastic. How haunting that music is.
Indeed.
And it really, the countertenor and the lute is such a unique sounding sort of companionship, I think. And I hope for all the listeners out there that it sounded as good as it did in this studio here in the middle of London. But anyway, Pat, so in your own words, can you just tell me what's so special and unique about your voice and the voice of the countertenor in general?
I guess the first thing that's strange about the voice is the fact that I'm male. I'm a man. I'm a fully grown man.
Yes.
At the grand age of 21. And you know the pitch at which I sing and all countertenors sing is much higher than what most men sing.
Yes.
And I guess the special quality of it, I mean, it's often described by people, reviewers and authors, as ethereal or somewhat sort of otherworldly.
Yes, it is. It's ghostly, you know, that's what it sounds like
perhaps.
to me.
Hopefully not too ghostly to be sort of whispering. But no, yeah, it's a sort of strange ethereal quality which comes from the vocal mechanism that men use to create the sort of countertenor voice.
Yes.
I guess.
So explain a bit about that. I mean, you're obviously you're a man who's gone through, you're a boy who's gone through puberty.
Yeah,
but
correct.
you've maintained the sort of the pitch, or you've trained your voice to keep that sort of small area of it which you sung as a young man. Yes,
I guess it is a different mechanism from singing as a treble, but the effect of it is that you sing at the same pitch, roughly, perhaps slightly lower than you did as before your voice broke.
Yes.
And all men, this is something I like to tell people, is that all men can sing countertenor to a certain degree.
Yes.
And it's a question, I mean, everyone has the vocal mechanism to be able to do it. And lots of men laugh using their falsetto, which is the sort of physiology which allows you to do it. And that's when your voice flips up into this high mode. Equally, you know, lots of pop singers sing what is kind of countertenor, and they use their falsettos. Freddie Mercury famously did it a lot.
Yes, of course.
You know, Plan B in more modern times also
well, I
uses
was
a lot of
going to ask you, Pat, have you ever listened to the music of Sam Smith? He's in the charts at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is your personal opinion on his voice? Is he kind of goes and uses the falsetto?
Absolutely.
And sort of that high-pitched voice a lot.
He uses it a lot, and in the context of pop music, it's normally the case that the singer is using their normal sort of male la 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 voice for the majority of it, and then they'll suddenly flip up for that sort of special effect into falsetto. And that's you know, that's what Sam Smith does. That's what Freddie Mercury used to do.
Yeah.
And you know, Mika, who's somewhat faded from public consciousness now, but
that was a few years ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, he uses falsetto almost all the time, and you know, is highly trained in doing so.
Yes, no, fantastic. So it's not just in historic music that you hear this type of voice.
No.
And I guess, Pat, I would like to ask you, how did you, or when did you decide to actually become a countertenor, or why? At what point exactly was it where you thought, you know what, rather than become a baritone or a tenor or a bass, let's say, for example, you decided, okay, I want to maintain this incredible pitch.
Yeah. Well, as with a lot of countertenors, it started with the sort of Anglican church tradition.
Yes.
And I was a chorister at Hereford, as you mentioned earlier, in Hereford Cathedral. So my first exposure to the countertenor voice, I guess, when I was aware of it, was listening to the lay clerks, the men of the choir, who stood behind me when I was a treble. Sure. And I remember really enjoying listening to the two countertenors in Hereford Cathedral Choir sing. And, you know, I thought, part of me at that stage when I was maybe sort of 11 thought, oh, that's quite interesting. I wonder if I could do that when I'm older. Then after a period trying to sing tenor and sounding absolutely horrible,
really?
frankly.
You gave it a go then?
I gave it a few months.
Yes.
I thought, you know, maybe I should just stick up with this high stuff. So I tried it again, and I was taught by a woman called Lucy Bowen, who's the wife of my director of music at Hereford, and she basically enabled my voice to settle as a countertenor, and it has done.
Yes,
since.
and so obviously you're still training now to
I mean,
expand it and to give it even more strength.
Yeah, exactly. And as you get older, I mean, there's sort of crucial apex that it gets better as you get older and more mature, and then at some point you have to realise that it's probably not getting any better anymore.
Yes.
And,
no, of course. Very interesting indeed. Now, of course, because this is Renaissance FM, a show dedicated to early music, and I'm not sure if many of the listeners out there know, but some of the greatest composers of the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries wrote for the countertenor, and of course another type of voice which shouldn't really kind of be confused with the castrati voice. Can you explain the difference between a countertenor and a castrati? Because many people will have in the back of their minds that they've heard of a chap called Farinelli or something like that.
Yeah.
Explain very briefly if you can.
So Well, this is probably the thing I get asked most often after concerts is,
Yes.
when did you have the operation and all that sort of thing.
But of course, well,
And
obviously,
particularly, when it's not 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm a high countertenor.
Yes.
Normally, I sing higher than most. But the difference is there's no operation involved in singing countertenor. What you do is when you're making sound, your vocal cords sort of come together, and you blow air from your diaphragm up through your vocal cords, and they vibrate, and that transmits through your mouth, and that's how you create sound. When you're singing falsetto, so countertenor, you only allow half of your vocal cords, roughly, a small section, to vibrate, meaning that the pitch is higher, and that's using a smaller apex.
Yes. And the castrati in...
Castrati, when this sort of stopped by the beginning of the 20th century, thankfully.
Yes, of course.
Otherwise, I'd be done for. But
No children.
when boy choristers finished their time singing in choirs in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, often they would have a warm bath, and they would get out, rubber bands and scissors.
No, let's not describe it. I think, but I guess you can. Yeah, you've given us the pictures of
and what that
exactly
does
happens.
is that basically freezes in some way the process of development over puberty, so the voice stays at that pitch. But it has a very different quality.
Yes, it does. It does indeed. And of course, incredibly famous composers such as Handel wrote for the castrati, and castrati, of course, were kind of like the massive, huge pop stars of their day. They were followed everywhere by adoring fans, and
Handel himself favoured particular castrati, most famously Farinelli, about whom there's been a film made.
Yes, a good film.
A good film. But he wrote lots of great opera roles for him, and now they form the basis of a lot of great countertenor repertoire.
Yes,
of those opera roles written for Farinelli. But obviously now we use falsetto rather than castration.
Great, of course. Well, that leads us perfectly onto a recording that we have of you, Patrick, singing some Handel indeed. So would you like to just extremely briefly introduce this recording that we're going to play?
Yep, this is a recording of Kind Health Descends, which is a duet from Handel's Birthday Ode for Queen Anne, and it's a live recording from a concert in King's College Chapel last year.
fantastic, a wonderful recording. That was Kind Health Descends from Handel's Ode for the Birthday of Queen Anne, recorded in King's College Chapel with conductor Benedict Kearns and soprano Anna Cavaliero, recorded in November. And of course, on that recording as well, we had the voice of Patrick, who's our guest on today's show. Wonderful recording, Pat. That must have been incredible to be a part of.
Thank you. It was, yeah. I mean, it was lovely to sing with Anna, the soprano, in that recording. She was a student who's now graduated from Cambridge. And, yeah, we did this concert in King's College Chapel, exploring some Bach and some Handel. And it was lovely to duet with the soprano.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you really get a sense of the difference in tone of your voice compared to the soprano. And I should say the first voice that you heard on that recording was the soprano, and Pat had this the one that came in second, which is you can really tell it's different, it's warmer, it has a different strength to it. And
Handel recognised that, I think, and there's some beautiful sort of suspensions and clashes in the music, and he manages them so that, you know, they're where the voices meet best. So you know, the soprano comes down and the alto comes up.
Yes,
the countertenor comes up, and you get your clash in the middle, and you know, it's cleverly managed by Handel.
Yeah, it's and of course that recording done in the fantastic King's College Chapel, which just the acoustics in there are to die for, really, aren't they?
No, it's a dream to sing in.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it must be an absolute pleasure for you to be able to perform in there regularly.
Well, yeah, I sing in there every day, singing the services with the choir at King's, and I mean, yeah, there's no better place to sing. And,
Not at all.
And particularly, I think, for the countertenor voice, it picks it up really, really well, and it's the perfect space.
Of course, I should also mention to our listeners out there that Patrick has been extremely fortunate enough to have participated in several masterclasses with arguably one of the most famous countertenors out there at the moment, a man called Andreas Scholl, who has done countless numbers of recordings as one of the greatest countertenors of the 21st century. And I would just like to ask you, Pat, what sort of advice did he give you? What pearls of wisdom were there?
Well, he's just a lovely bloke. Firstly, he's absolutely enormous. As a man, he's sort of 6'5" or 6", and
tall chap.
And it's strange because, you know, his sound is, you know, sort of countertenor, but I mean, sort of doesn't really match his massive giant frame. But you know, masterclasses with him are amazing. He gave a lot of advice on performance and delivery, and you know, as a first year undergraduate, I was looking for any sort of possible sound bites from Andreas Scholl throughout the course of the masterclass, and he gave me one which was he said, "You have achieved the mission of Bach," which I rather liked, by which he meant nothing other than that conveying the text really clearly in a piece by Bach is the only thing you really need to do to make the music sound, as long as you're getting the notes right, I think.
Yes, of course. Well, that's good advice from Andreas Scholl.
Yeah,
achieving the mission of Bach. Wonderful, absolutely perfect. And also, Pat, you don't just obviously you have lots and lots of things going on, not just at Cambridge but elsewhere. I mean, what sort of projects should we all look out for from you in the next coming weeks and months?
I guess, well, my next big project is also in King's College Chapel, where that last one was recorded, and that's I'm singing with a viol consort, and it's a pleasure to sing with you this morning, Adam, on the lute. But other early instruments include viols, and I'm singing some songs by Bird and Gibbons, probably in a concert on the 15th of June in King's College Chapel, and yeah, that'll be a treat.
And I'm sure you're doing lots of things that you can't even tell us about yet.
There's a few things in the diary which I probably shouldn't announce yet. I'm going back to my hometown of Ludlow in Shropshire to do a recital of Purcell songs with harpsichord, and that's also in June. In fact, the day after.
Ludlow's gorgeous. Lots of old buildings there.
Lots of old buildings, yeah.
Perfect.
So that's an exciting project to go back to where my sort of singing started and do a recital there.
Excellent. Well, Pat, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming in and explaining to us all here at Renaissance FM what's so special about your voice. It's been a real pleasure to hear it, and to hear it live, of course, and your recording as well.
Thank you so much.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you. And that's kind of the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen out there listening. I would also like to thank Stephanie, who will be back next week, hopefully, to present as usual, be at the helm. I'd also like to thank Paul, the technician who's here with us in the room, making all of these words and notes sound perfect, as good as they can be. And I would also finally like to thank all of you out there who've been listening. It's been a pleasure holding the show, and hopefully we will meet again sometime soon. And Pat, could you just briefly introduce us the last song that you and I will be performing?
Absolutely. This is another piece by John Dowland, who was one of the primary composers in Renaissance England at the turn of the sort of 17th century, and it's not a happy piece, as none of his pieces really were. It's called "Weep You No More, Sad Fountains."
You're listening to Resonance 104.4 FM.